what we're going to do now, we're going to get into groups of 3 and just have a think together, just for 10 minutes, just have a think together what questions you might want to ask. Stir them up. Just anything that you find interesting from the first you want to go a bit deeper into, or just any kind of random questions you have. So if you just get into groups of 3, and I'll ring a bell, and then we'll come back and ask the questions. Do you still go to the theatre?
Relatively. I went last night. Did you? It's not the easiest play.
Is that really boring?
No, it's like it's pretty violent. It's more political. It was pretty good. I think it's not the easiest play. They took it fast, so it's the easiest. It was probably the thing like Shakespeare, it needs to be accessed. It's just good. Actually, a lot of the experience is kind of slightly sounding out. What I used to just work on books and so I'm not really seeing much
I would say before my daughter a friend of mine, you might know Sam the opposite. He was playing in a show at Bloomsbury Theatre based on a Chinese story, and he was playing this Chinese god. I went to see him in Cardiff a few months ago. He was playing the
similar place.
Similar kind of place, yeah. It's like, it's kind of like really good conviction. There's like almost as many people in the audience on the stage as you was watching. They're kind of funded productions with high standards. And I reckon Sam's going places. Imagine him, I don't know. Imagine him being brought up in that school. He's always kind of playing the main role there.
Is he based around here?
Not anymore, no, he's living kind of Guildford. Because his career is successful. And quite strong.
But I was sort of ballistic.
How was it? Well, I went to a really good school because I was at CT. They've just come back from Japan actually. Screen things. They seem to kind of have a lot of interest.
How have folk free schools.
Very good.
It's more of a move towards folk free schools. It's such a big one where you just have a whole day where you want to hear, you don't do it.
Yeah, I think that should be just mandatory. Okay, so we've got a bit of time for questions. Who would like to go first? Sarah, shut up.
Sir Manus, thank you for coming and thank you for your conversation. I really enjoyed it. You mentioned earlier on in your talk about magic, and it's something that I find really interesting, and the magical side of Buddhism. I'm just wondering where it is for you today. You know, you've been at it for a few years, and where's the magic for you? You alluded to the theatre and that connection.
Good question. Yeah, it probably is the question, isn't it? So sort of keep asking, and yeah, it is. I think definitely it gets easier. It gets easier to lose touch with it, doesn't it? As to begin, I remember sort of coming along and you start to encounter the Dharma and kind of doing the 4-year mixed study course and being like, wow, there's all this stuff to kind of discover. And yeah, it's then how to keep that alive. Where is it for me? It's always in, I think meditation can be a real source of that, but I find particularly I need to give time around meditation, so that it's not just the routine of going and doing the same practices, and so it's like I need to kind of either be reading some Dharma or reflecting on how I want to approach meditation or what's actually going on with it, for it to feel like for that to feel like an ongoing exploration or an adventure of some sort, rather than the danger is it just becoming a bit rote. Where is the magic? Well, I think perhaps recently reading Precious Teachers on this retreat. I think the one thing that I was really struck with was just the level of good manners that was sort of present, and the kind of within a more traditional culture, particularly Yogi Chen, who you can see up on the wall over there. I just remember, his description. Very we're practicing very intensely. He'd meditate like all day, and had been doing that for years, but was quite restricted for a long time by his need to help his family and his elderly parents and so on. Just a sense of sort of duty and appropriateness, and I've been reflecting on my life, and in a way, I think in some ways I've been sort of well brought up, but there's definitely amongst my teenage friends and so on, there was a kind of rebellious archetype that we were probably trying to live out, and politeness isn't really part of that particularly. And I used to do a lot of swearing and so on that thankfully dried up a little while ago, but a sense that that kind of well-mannered quality isn't so much part of it. So for some reason I feel quite inspired by that. It feels quite linked to devotion as well. Sort of living much more just sort of quiet, modest sort of service of an ideal. So yeah, I feel a bit inspired in that and trying to notice that. But that's partly that. You partly notice that by noticing when you're bad mannered. So it's a little bit painful as well to be spotted. But that's something.
Yeah, I was wondering, you talked a lot about your almost a synthesis between your career and the Sangha and shifting towards the Sangha. I was curious if you'd had anything to say about romantic relationships, and was there any tensions there navigating relationships?
Yeah. Certainly. I sort of used to joke that I came along to meditate because I wanted to become better with women and a better theatre director, and I think probably doing lots of meditation and so on did probably help. I think probably made me better with both of those fields, and less interested as well. Those things might be related. It's like as I got a bit less invested in those things as the kind of the goal in my life, the more ease there was around it, but also the more I could kind of sort of take it or leave it, really. I'm in a relationship at the moment, and have been at different phases through my Buddhist life, but I've also had quite long periods of being single as well. I more and more think that that's probably the kind of, I hope this is going from the line everywhere. I'm just thinking about my girlfriend. She's probably not going to watch this. But I do kind of think that for me that pattern probably makes the most sense, or something like periods in relationship and periods being single. I think that's, for me, that's sort of how it's. I find after a certain point, I can really just feel the attachment to the relationship starting to feel like it's drawing a kind of frame around my life. It's like, oh, this is where I am. This is the person. This is the, and in some ways that can be really supportive. Certainly because it removes the constant sort of scratching around for a sexual partner. But there's something I find in it that after a while I can start to feel a bit hemmed in. And I don't know. Probably that would have happened if I hadn't found the Dharma to some extent. But I don't know if I'd have named it as a problem in the same kind of way. I sort of see that happen a lot with friends who I've known for a long time and so on. There's a sense that there's all this friendship around school and university and so on, and then there's a moment after that where that starts to thin as everyone gets into relationships, and that becomes the primary thing, particularly if people have children and so on. Of course, that's all to be expected to some degree, but there's something I was missing in that. I was just wanting more, particularly more male friendship in my life. So I think often the tension actually is between friendship with men and a romantic relationship, and I sort of feel like a lot of my emotional needs are met by being in community and around in friendship with more people more of the time. That can be a tension in a relationship where I sort of get there and feel like, oh, I don't need to tell you everything that's kind of going on. I don't feel the same sort of compulsion to, this isn't the only place where I can kind of spill my heart out. And in a way I'm pleased that it's not. And I also then, I do need to make an effort to do that as well. so that it's more than just something quite functional. Yeah, it's quite live in my mind at the moment, actually, wasn't it?
Are you able to tell us a bit more about your solitary retreats and whether there are expectations before going on to a retreat as such, and what the benefits are, and how would you then apply the benefits, or how do you take bits from the
Out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like towards the end of your last retreat, you said there was like you were meant to have a few days of reflecting at the end, but you didn't. I mean, no one's there to guide you or whip you to do certain things. So, what is it that you do, and why, and expectations or not, and how do you then take elements from a solitary retreat?
Yeah, great. In a way, I sort of. I think it depends. I think when often speaking to friends of mine who are going on the first solitary retreat, say, what I tend to encourage them to do is to sort of have a fairly simple, normal program that you're used to from other retreats, with meditation, with puja in the evening. More time's taken up because you've got to cook for yourself and wash up, and a lot of that stuff of just looking after yourself ends up taking up quite a lot of the day. And then maybe a bit of Dharma reading, several sessions of meditation. In terms of planning, often it's to do with what am I going to bring to read, and that. But the reading can easily become the main distraction, I find, because reading can become really, really enjoyable. In solitude, your mind's quite clear for it. It's very satisfying, but it can easily just do loads and loads of it. In a way, the main practice on solitary is to do nothing, and just sort of just being there, really. So sometimes what I do is, to begin with, just having to spend time where I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit in this chair and do absolutely nothing. It's almost like wean myself off more input gradually. And sometimes I might take a day in the middle where I just don't read anything all day, and sort of put all my books in a drawer, and then often that marks a bit of a step change into more depth in the retreat. So it's probably more about what I want, and what you are reading, of course, really perfumes the experience. I often read some combination of some Dharma teaching, just to keep some inspiration. I might bring some notes from a meditation retreat or something to give me a bit something to do with in meditation, or not. A bit of poetry can be great, and then I really like reading Bante's memoirs in the evenings. It's got this perfect balance between being like a story and a bit of a treat, and also definitely relevant to practicing and another source of inspiration. So in a way that sounds like quite a lot, but then I wouldn't sort of read for huge chunks. So in a way quite sort of simple like that, and just trying to just ease into actually the fact that it's okay, I don't need to do very much. Often the tension I find is a part of me being like, what am I wasting this time, basically? Here I am just sitting, I'm just like pottering around, not doing anything. And there's something in me that kind of thinks, I need to be achieving something, I need to get through some books, I need to do like tick off some hours of meditation or whatever it is. And actually gradually it's just the being there and being by oneself that has an impact, I think. I think it helps one to be more of an individual being in solitude, because often we go to other people for to kind of bolster up our sense of who we are and sort of help us feel like a human being. And there's something about just having to kind of keep staying with something kind of just the sort of rawness of just being by oneself, which can, I think, particularly in the afternoons, it can have a kind of melancholy feeling to it that I think for a while I sort of get to the afternoon and think like, oh no, and then start to feel really lonely, and I've sort of gradually, I think, learned to recognise that's just the nature of that moment in time, and actually you can just ease into something slightly sort of melancholy, and that can be really, really lovely in its own way. I think what all that has an effect of is helping one to be more of an individual getting back. One of the things I noticed quite quickly in getting back was that from the long one, was that I struggled to sort of play little social games, like the sort of, somebody tells a joke that you don't find that funny, and you sort of like, you smile along and you kind of do, play nice in some way or another. I found it's almost like my face had stopped being able to to quite respond in the way that I was used to. I was a little bit sort of shocked, but just having like my responses felt like more of me and less of what I sort of was expected of me or something. So in a way, I don't quite know what effect it has, or what when I go on the solitary, what I'm particularly aiming for. But I think just to trusting in the process of it, and I think it does seem to continue to have an effect. It's all mysterious what it's all doing. Why do we keep practicing the Dharma? What are we expecting in the next 5 years or whatever? I don't know really, but it seems to be doing something. Certainly don't want to do anything else.
You mentioned like the word individual there, and I think that's got a particular meaning in Tree Rat now. It's quite important. Could you say a bit more about that, the kind of the true individual and what that is? Because that seems it's quite an important teaching that we have, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sangharakshita's emphasised the importance of being a true individual.
He's quite specific about what that means, and that includes qualities of emotional positivity and awareness of others and so on. Because in a way, it's one of our slightly easily misunderstood teachings, because as we were talking about in the first before we had tea, our tendency in our culture is to very much go it alone, and to be sort of individualistic in the sense of just putting ourselves first and feeling like, oh, this is what I think about this, so that's just how it is, and you can't really challenge it or something, and that's your truth and that's my truth, and so on and so forth. So I think it's more to do with being able to think for oneself, not just being sort of caught in the kind of currents of what other people around you are doing and thinking, and so that one's decision making, thinking, emotional response emerges more from the depths of one's own mind than a kind of conditioned reaction, basically.
I've got a question, if I'm allowed to ask a question.
Of course you
So
are.
for the permission to ask a question. You said something which struck me quite early on in an interview about what you saw happening at the LBC when you come along. You talked about people doing something together and that having a certain momentum to it, and the more they did it, the more was possible. Presumably you didn't kind of see that the moment you walked in the door. My question is, like, when did you get a sense of what was going on there, and what was it that made you feel that, I want to add to this momentum myself?
In a sense, I do. In hindsight, I do kind of feel like I noticed something when I walked through the door. It took me a while to kind of realise that or put something on that. Just we're very affected by atmospheres, aren't we? And it was like I walked into an atmosphere that I just wasn't used to, and there was something that made my initial response was just, well, I'll come back here again, because it was a 5-minute walk. It was a really good evening, so I thought I'm definitely coming back here. And then it was almost like working out why that was gradually. That's not the case. That's certainly not the case for everyone. Some people that sort of come along, meditation, a bit unsure, etc., and then gradually you sort of then start to see something that then really appeals or something. I think it was kind of there from point one. I remember I think the first retreat that I described where we did this dedication ceremony, on that a few people gave talks about why they were Buddhists, and then listen, which I really enjoyed, and very different people, different backgrounds, and all relatable. And I remember then overhearing the retreat leader talking to one of them afterwards and saying, "Oh, there's this moment where you just sort of go, oh damn, I'm a Buddhist." and I was standing there sort of, I think they were inside the building and I was standing sort of outside in the dark, listening to this and thinking, oh damn, I think I might be. So a sort of, I think that just came out of everything that I was learning and doing seemed to resonate, and I was feeling different. I think I'd kind of built a life that was all about achieving something in the theatre, and there was this sense that actually my life can be a bit more about being my life, about actually enjoying being alive and exploring what that is, sort of for its own sake. So there was a like a sort of influx of some relief. I think that there was more than this particular trajectory that I'd kind of carved out for myself. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, so you also mentioned about living in a community and working for the London Buddhist Center. I think you really did quite a bit in all the benefits you're finding doing that, but if you have to draw some of the main aspects that supported your spiritual practice, what would they be?
I mean, I think doing those two things probably have been the biggest supports to my practice. In community, just a sense of, be a kind of, an intimacy with others that I think takes quite a long time. I realised it was a few years of being in community and around the centre that I started to feel like, oh no, this spiritual friendship that people talk about, I think I'm starting to get a feeling for that. So I think when I come along, when anyone starts getting involved in Triratna, we talk a lot about spiritual friendship, and you have a sense, that's something that we should be doing. It's like a special kind of friendship. It should be much better than anything I've experienced before. But actually, we've got all these friends that we've known for years and years and years, who we are just much closer to than these Buddhists that we've just met, which is understandable. And actually, it takes a lot of time to really start to build genuine friendships with these people who we also have this shared value and the kind of unwritten contract that we can say a bit more to one another and challenge one another a bit more, and the depth that can come from that. And there was a moment where I started to think, actually, particularly with Kshantikara, who's the chair here now, we were living together for from the start of my time there, and feeling like, we're really starting to get to know each other, partly because we'd started to have some real arguments and or notice where we were kind of clashing a bit, and it's like, we're really in relation to one another. We can't you can't just get away from each other now that we don't completely see eye to eye on something. So I think learning to be intimate and actually relax around friends, rather than just feeling like relaxation is something that I do when I'm by myself or with a girlfriend or whatever, but being able to just be relaxed and open with people. And also in terms of, I think particularly for me, working with other Buddhists has been important, because that's where so much of my energy and my sense of who I am and what I can do and my skills and so on is both visible and gets engaged with by others. So where people then start to notice, like, this is that thing that you do actually is really annoying, or has this particular effect on me and other people, it seems, and which can be quite bracing. I think there's something of that in community, but it just doesn't, because mainly what we're doing is we're relaxing together and having dinner together and so on. It's not got the same level of sort of robust intensity that I think that's where I've learned the most about myself, definitely, and having to kind of, there's a pressure to then be able to follow through on that, because that relates to the work and the consequences in the Buddhist Center. So I feel like, I really do need to get better at that thing, because otherwise I'm going to negatively impact this situation that I want to contribute to. So I think, in a way, it's all the same things. It's affected by our ethical practice, our meditation, our reflection on the Dharma. It's applied to sangha situations where it really kind of light gets shone on.
No hiding place in your living and working with people, is it?
Yeah.
Do you think what if you're not living in a community and not working? Any advice for people like that? Because most of the people here are not living in community, not working. How do you get that same level of kind of intensity where you can't hide yourself anymore, and you've got to you've got to kind of be yourself? How do you do that in not in those circumstances? Do you think?
I think it just would require more intentionality in a way. Just by taking a job and moving in somewhere, there's more effort that's required than that, of course, but it just sort of does. It will come out in the wash because you are just around these people. I think probably it will just require more of a commitment to being in contact with people. So that might be, just 2 or 3 people that you want to really make a commitment to get to know and spend time together. And time together is just the main. There's nothing. It's not in a way that much more complicated than that. But you need to have a good amount of contact. And the reason we make a lot of our friends when we're at school and university and so on is that you're around each other all the time. And so if we're in, if we've got a family, or if we've got full jobs and so on, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So in a way, taking much bolder steps with our friendship than we're probably used to doing, rather than just adding a few Buddhist friends. It's like, can we meet up like once a week or once a fortnight or something? Can we people, when they're training for ordination, sometimes do going for refuge groups where you meet weekly with a group of other men and talk about your ethical practice particularly. And that's a really, really good context for friendship, because there's that regular contact and you're getting into sort of much deeper communication. So something like that's a really good basis for them really getting, meeting up one-to-one with certain of those people, or just creating context for yourself where that's possible, and ideally doing stuff together. So whether that's that you're on a team here at the centre for a particular class, and there's particular people that you see, and you just sort of dedicated to that and keep turning up. You see the same people day in, day out. A few of them you might try and make close friends with, and taking on projects that you've actually, if you're organising an event together, say, then you've actually got you're sort of held to account a bit with that. And someone else, if you're doing it with someone else, then you might rub up against each other a bit, and that's sort of good. But you also get the sense of being, we did that thing together. Myself and Kashantikara sort of started this sub-25 group at the LBC to get all involved very early on in that. And that's largely where we became friends, because it was this sense of like we were trying to make this thing happen together and kind of competing over it and all of that. And it was a perfect recipe for more overlap. And I think particularly for men, like it really helps to have a project. Something it's more than just sort of chatting over tea. It's like we're doing something together. So I think it's just a bit of ingenuity, but but being quite definite about who it is you're trying to get closer to and how you're going to do that. Otherwise it could take, without that we might never quite get to this kind of calorimetry target that we're talking about. It'd be very possible to be coming fairly regularly to a centre like this for decades without quite getting to that level of intimacy, I think.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
I'm trying to distill down a question for you. You mentioned Samuel Atchison before the tea break and having met him, and you referred to him again. What's in my mind is how leaders like himself now carry forward Sangha's teachings to what I would call the next generation, of which, forgive me, I regard you as a member of the next generation, actually. This generation, anyway. And what relevance that you can portray or establish for that, say, for instance, your under 25 group that you and Sankara have worked so hard to develop. And so it's a question of, with a Triratna, really, basically. And whether you see it that way or how you see it, and in those respects, how you might carry forward, go forward.
Yeah, I think that is the question. So the further away we get from his death, the more we've got a sort of a movement that's up and running, and people that teach and are influenced by one another and all sorts of different things, and the Dharma very broadly. But keeping his teaching front and centre, I think is going to be really important for us to sort of hang together as a movement. So I think there's so much, he's taught so much, and it's so principial. It takes us right to the heart of what's important in the Dharma, so that it provides a kind of basis to then open out and explore all these primary texts, and even engage with what other Buddhists are saying on a very solid foundation. But I think it takes quite a long time it can take quite a long time to build that foundation. There's a lot that he taught, and the principles that draw it all together, I think, are subtle, and keeping on going back to them and realising a sort of there's more depth, or a bit more. I didn't quite get that. It seems very simple at first read, but sort of keeping on to kind of returning to that and touching back into that, I think it's like that's the mortar that holds the whole thing together. And then there's also a need to update and to speak to a new generation. And I created a course called Digital Dharma, which is looking at our relationship to digital technology and how we practice mindfulness, etc., in a world where we're all on our phones all the time. I think just realising that seems to be a primary issue that people were facing in trying to practice. Just the fact that just getting so easily distracted through these devices. And so I wanted to kind of find a way to explore that. And the first thing I was tempted to go back to was Mind Reacting Creative, which was this talk that Bhante gave in the 60s, which is his kind of refreshed way of looking at the fundamental Buddhist teachings of the workings of the mind. And I think it's so clear that either our mind is sort of reactive and spinning around in circles where you just you see the picture of the nice sandwich and think, oh yeah, I could have a sandwich, and then your life bounces around from things like that, versus something more creative where it's something kind of emerges more from within our inner resources. In that lecture, he talks about seeing a billboard of a picture of a holiday and thinking, oh yeah, I'd quite like a holiday. And the kind of he talks us through the kind of thought process that goes with that. And I thought that's exactly what's happening when we're on our phones. It's just so much more extreme. The conditions that we're in are just so much more extreme than that. So it feels like the principle is there in his teaching to relate to, but the sort of packaging needs to constantly be refreshed. And in order to do that, I think that's a real challenge, because it's like we need to imbibe the teaching very deeply so that we can meet the context that we're in and the people that we're meeting and their particular problems, and speak with a new voice, I suppose, to use his language, to kind of find a fresh way of saying exactly the same thing. And I think that's really what he's exemplified in doing in the first place. He just did it in the 60s, and I think what he's wanting us to do is not just keep repackaging exactly the same thing he was saying to people 50 years ago, but to keep finding new ways along the same lines of principle. But yeah, we need to read him closely. I think before we start expanding out to other Buddhism, I think we need to really build a really strong foundation in his teaching.
David, you had
Yeah, when you moved to community, you mentioned that you thought, oh, it's going to be very difficult, but good for me. Do you have anything more to say on when you think it's good to do things where you don't really feel like them, or you think it's going to be difficult, but somehow good for you?
In not just in relation to community, but in general.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we need to do something of that all the time, don't we? Whether it's doing some exercise or meditating, or there's probably lots of things that benefit from some discipline or some sort of calculated risk taking. If our whole life's lived by that, then, and we're constantly just pushing ourselves to do things that we don't really want to do, then we won't be able to. Basically, there'll be some sort of reaction. So I think it's this question of how do we sort of gradually educate our emotional life more and more towards the things that are helping us. I think that often works through doing them and then noticing and then keeping on remembering the effects of that. When we to begin with, you think, I need to meditate, otherwise bad things will happen, or and there's a bit of a bargaining that happens. But gradually, the more we do it, the more we want to, because more and more we start to meditate, because actually meditation is just really enjoyable. It can be this really enjoyable thing to do. But there might be quite a long period in which it's not, and it's helping us, but actually it can be a bit challenging and so on. So I think it's a bit of both. It's like, how do we there's a need for some discipline, and there's a need to find and remember enjoyment in it as quickly as we can, and sort of bring those two things together, so that the sort of the disciplined life is actually exactly what we want to be doing, because we're enjoying the sort of the regularity of it, or whatever. With something like moving into a community, it's almost like a single risk, isn't it? And I think holding it with the lightness of, I don't know, something I'm going to try for a year and see how I get on, and it doesn't need to be the whole answer to my life or whatever, but giving, an appropriate sense of giving something a really good go, but without the pressure of this has to be it, and I'm not allowed to do anything else or whatever. Does that answer what you get?
I think that's good.
We've probably got time for one more question. Does anyone know?
So you're the director of LBC. What do you do during the day as part of this role?
What does that involve? It's quite varied, which I like. it's mostly talking to people, which I also like. I'd quite like to have a bit more time to sort of think and follow up on things and so on. But it's a big, it's a big situation. The LBC. There's because we've got the Drasana Retreat Centre and a few businesses and then sort of different things happening and people coming and going. There's a bit of a phase where, for instance, Maitri Shura has just left the London Buddhist Centre. I was working with him for a long time, and he's coming to get involved here at the NLBC. You'll benefit from him. He's a very good man to have. But there's a few changes like that happening, people coming and going. That takes up quite a bit of time. So I'm often quite involved with the team and trying to build the sense of a team who are working together. Who is that going to be? What are they going to do? Are they happy in it? And if not, why not? And then in little individual projects and things that come up, often it's to do with, I'm having to learn how to, what it is to make decisions, and when do you need to kind of involve others and think creatively with other people? When do you need to just actually decide something so things can happen and move on? And so it is definitely a kind of Sangha role. It's sort of all about the people around it, and then my communication, my ability to communicate with others is definitely kind of in the spotlight, and I've got a lot to sort of feel like I'm constantly having to learn to do that better. Knowing when to sort of say no and adhere to a principle, when to really listen to someone else, when to be willing to kind of flex what I think. So it's sort of quite a lot of thinking on my feet. I find it demanding. I think the more I've got into it, the more I realise I need to be on the top of my game day to day to kind of do that. And I do feel tested by it. And I think the reason it's helpful, and I've with friends who've taken on, like Shantikara here or others who've taken on larger responsibilities, this sense that in a way you just can't do it by yourself. I feel like it's forcing me to be more in relationship to friends and able to just be like, okay, I'm not, rather than just trying to sort of fix the whole thing myself, being able to sort of relax and be supported by others and use other people's ideas and so on, but also the need to just kind of surrender in a way to to the Dharma. I do the Manjugesha practice, and so to really need to call on the help of Manjugesha and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to sort of do it for me in a way. I feel at my best when it feels like that's sort of happening, and then being able to kind of learn to kind of roll with the punches and kind of the slightly chaotic and never finished sort of nature of any sort of creative work. My tendency is definitely to want to feel like, okay, that's it, got it. It just doesn't work. So it relies on some sort of fluidity, spontaneity, and confidence that I don't always have. So.
Okay, well, thanks for your questions, everyone, and thank you very much, Stiramanis, for your very thoughtful and articulate answers to all our questions. I think we could have gone a lot longer. There's lots of more things I'd like to ask, but got to stop for now. So let's just give Stiramanis a nice round of applause.